Welcome to Three Thoughts On. I am delighted to have Charlie Engle at the podcast today. Charlie, how are you doing
Man,
today?
life is good today because I'm sitting here with you.
Thank you for saying that, Charlie. Charlie and I have known each other for a number of years now, and I am so happy that we've become good friends. And I'm happy that you're making the time. I know you're a busy guy. You're working on a lot of projects right now. But I want to get started by giving people who don't know who you are, I don't know where they've been if they don't know who you are, but people who don't know who you are, a little bit of a story about who you are and what do you do
Yeah,
today.
well, I'm going to start with this right here, Raphael, because this tells a little bit about who I am. I just a couple of weekends ago surpassed my 31-year anniversary of being clean and sober. And every year I do a special run where I run for the same number of hours to equal my years sober. So I ran for 31 hours this year. And I invited many of my closest friends, you included, to come share that experience with me. And so I wore this shirt today to honor the fact that you gave up a weekend and came and spent that weekend with me, walking and running around in a circle and sharing love and fellowship and community with a bunch of other people. And I would like to say that that is like the definition of who I am: community, fellowship. Going back in my life, I struggled with addiction from a pretty early age in college. Uh, Spent 10 years kind of trying to dig myself out of that hole, all the time, leading companies in sales and living an outwardly successful life, but really struggling with drinking and with cocaine specifically. And the birth of my first son at 29 was sort of the catalyst for me to make a change. Now, in the longer version in my book, I talk about how I thought just him being alive was actually going to stop me from drinking and drugging. And that's not how it works. I needed to go into the abyss and hit bottom. And I did do that many, many times. But that final time, 31 years ago, really started my running career. And I went to an AA meeting on that particular night. I got up the next day and put on my running shoes. And I'd say for the last 31 years, I haven't really stopped running since. And that includes a couple hundred marathons, lots and lots of ultra marathons, runs across countries and entire continents. In fact, I became the first person to ever run all the way across Africa, the Sahara Desert, specifically about 4,500 miles. And in that run, I ran, 2 marathons every day for 111 consecutive days. And Matt Damon made a documentary film. Together, we created water.org, which is the world's largest clean water nonprofit. So in a sober life, I managed to really accomplish some cool things, not things that made me a lot of money, or I wasn't after anything, but the knowledge that I was capable of doing something big. And I think the main thing is that I've used whatever notoriety I've gotten out of that to as a springboard to spend a lot of time talking about addiction and recovery. I have worked with Deepak Chopra, as you know, because you're friends with him also, and his Chopra Foundation to try to help solve some of the issues around addiction and recovery. I work in most everything I do these days has to do with wellness in some way, shape, or form: physical, mental, spiritual, emotional wellness. And you and I have that in common. And so, that's a short version of kind of, where I am. I live in Durham, North Carolina, which is where I'm sitting now, and married to my beautiful wife, Astasiana, who has been battling cancer for the last 6 years. So again, wellness is first and foremost in my day-to-day existence.
Well, thank you for that background, Charlie. I find your life very interesting. And every time we get together, I learn a little bit more, a little bit something new. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, so you mentioned 31 years of being clean, being sober. And in those 31 years, you've been all over the world doing all kinds of amazing feats, mental and physical feats. I remember being many years ago being a huge fan of the Eco Challenge, and then only recently now I found out that you were in a few of those. So I'm gonna have to go back to those videos from Discovery Channel Eco Challenge and see if I see you there on TV. But the question is, as you go through all this time, you meet people from all over the world, you have experiences all over the world, you reach points of what it may seem like no return as you're going through these various feats where you have to keep pushing yourself to keep going, to keep pushing your body beyond what it may tell you that it could go, pushing your mind beyond or where it may tell you it can go. Uh, as you look back at all that time and all those endeavors, what will be some of the things that you've learned that you want to share with people, that now that you can look back, these are some of the things that actually got me through all
Yeah,
that?
I mean, I appreciate that question, and it's I freely acknowledge a couple of things. I've run a lot of miles in my life, and it tends to beg the question for people who maybe aren't runners, especially like, did I just switch addictions? Did I, is the thing that I'm actually doing a healthy thing? And the what I like to say to that is that it's been a process, like most things in life. It's been this long process of, I would even say early on in my running life, I was running literally to save my life. Like for the first 3 years of my sobriety, I ran every single day. I did not miss one day. And I ran more than 30 marathons in that period of time because I actually felt like my life depended on it. And as things progressed through the years, through the decades, even, I began to run more and more for me. And there was, early on, it's even arguable that I felt badly enough about myself as a human being, my insecurities. I'm not enough. I'm not a good person. I'm not, all these things, this baggage that we all tend to carry around, that I ran almost to punish myself in some ways. Like there was an aspect of it where I was sort of kicking my own ass every time I went out the door, because I kind of thought if I ran hard enough, I could get rid of the addiction part of me, that obsessive nature. I could like take a scalpel and cut that out, and that wouldn't, because I thought that guy was trying to kill me. It took those 3 years of running every day to understand that, in fact, my obsessive nature, my addictive nature is all the best parts of me.
No, that's fantastic. That's actually quite a transition there from saying, run to save your life to run to kill that aspect of you that you felt was trying to kill you, to then learn that is you felt was trying to kill you is actually a gift, because it gives you focus and it gives you resilience and endurance. So that's actually a very good way to define and see the process of growth, which is what we're here to do, right? I tell people all the time is we're not here to be happy. We're not here to make money. We're here to grow. That is the one constant in the universe, is growth. Everything grows until it doesn't. And that's when you stop growing, that is when the death process
Yeah.
begins. Because death in itself is also a process, right? We begin from a scientific point of view. That's how we know we're turning as we begin to die
Mm-hmm.
slowly, right? So right now, you're growing, I'm growing, we're all growing, and that's at least in my book the way to
Or
go.
we're not growing. I mean, some
So
people, aren't, and some people have this feeling that if everything is just stable in their life and their goal is to live a life without any problems. And what I've really learned, and especially through running too, is that that's an unrealistic goal. There will never be a day in my lifetime where there's not a quote unquote problem. The key is the perception of that problem. Can I still find happiness and serenity in the face of unresolved problems? Because they're always going to be there. So if you can only be happy when nothing is wrong, you're not going to have very many happy days. And so I think it's that embrace of what running has taught me, is to embrace hardship, especially self-imposed hardship, because I'm choosing that hardship. Other hardships, like my wife's illness or other things going on, I don't have a choice in. Like, I don't get to choose those. But the more often I put myself in a challenging situation and I find my way through that, that enables me to be able to do it sort of organically in the situations where I don't have control.
And that's very powerful. It talks to something that you mentioned when you were speaking to the crowd that week, and you mentioned something that along the lines of, it's not what happens to us as important as what we do about it. So tell me a little bit
Yeah.
more about that, and how you came to embrace that as part of your
Yeah. I mean,
life.
look, it's to me, everything, and I mean everything, is adaptation. You know, I don't even doing a podcast, doing like, I don't like to know too much before I go into things because I want it to be organic and spontaneous. And so I say quite often, what happens to us isn't nearly as important as what we do about it. Because what really matters is response. If you set up your life where you're trying to manipulate every situation to come out the way you want it to, that's a ridiculous waste of time, first of all. And it's too much effort on the front end. And I'm not saying not to prepare for something. If you have a meeting, if you're running a marathon, whatever, sure, preparation is important. But if you go into, and I mean any experience from a first date to a business meeting to running a marathon, if you go into it with the expectation of only one outcome, or any outcome, frankly, because outcomes screw us up, because we end up spending too much time focused on the outcome when the important part is what we are doing and saying right now in this moment. Things are going to go right, things are going to go wrong, and our ability to adapt to those different situations along the way is actually what's important. I mean, I hate to be cliche, but it is the journey. It's not the destination. And I mean, there's a million ways to say it, but that's the part that we need to pay attention to, because usually the outcome is pretty anticlimactic. The outcome is almost always known long before it actually comes in almost every situation. I mean, unless it's a World Cup soccer match, and you're going into penalty kicks, like like you just and
Yeah.
that's just exciting, but in most of our lives, everything is a process. Everything is a process. Almost nothing comes truly out of the blue, even though it feels like it. And so my desire is to approach a really positive situation or a really negative situation with the same mindset. I want to have the same mindset of curiosity. Even when something terrible is happening, I actually want to be able to see it and be curious about this terrible thing that's going on, rather than panic, because panic doesn't ever help. And it's my way of processing, and running again is what's taught me that, because I've run more than 100 miles a lot of times, at one time. And during that process, I've wanted to quit hundreds of times, because I'm not stupid. I get out there and I'm like, why did I think this was a good idea? But the point is, you find that point that you can't possibly go on emotionally, physically, spiritually. There's no way you can go on, and then you find a way to push past that by focusing only on the moment you are in, and not projecting that bad moment into the future. Because that's what we normally do, is we take that moment, an argument with a loved one, you got a twinge in your knee during a marathon, and our brain goes, oh man, it's always going to be like this from this point forward. But that's not true. It's just not the way it is. So in my view, the best thing we can all do, and that I've learned to do, is to teach ourselves to focus on the moment, not project it into the future as it's always going to be, terrible, and just one step at a time, focus on where you are right now.
You mentioned a lot of things in there that I find interesting, and you just reminded me of a quick story. You mentioned adaptation, right? And a few years ago, I had the blessed opportunity to take my kids to be with my kids in London. We had a quick vacation where we spent part of the time in London and then part of the time in mainland Europe. And one of the places that they wanted to go to was Oxford. So we went to Oxford and we walked around and we bumped into an area there where Charles Darwin had worked and where he had the area where he had given his speech, the original speech of the origin of the species, is now a museum with all kinds of really cool artifacts. And then they have pillars and signs of this is where Charles, talked about blah blah blah, this and that, and these are all the great minds. And while my kids were walking around looking at the museum, I bumped into one of the professors and I started asking him about Darwin, and he said, an interesting thing about the origin of the species is that Darwin didn't really focus on survival of the fittest. That's something that came much after by a lot of the folks that evaluated his work. He himself, and you can see this when you read the document, this is him telling me this. He actually focused and he used a lot the word or the phrase survival of the adaptable, right? In his mind, that was the core. Somehow, in the process of time and people getting into his work, it became survival of the fittest. And everybody talks about survival of the fittest today. But that wasn't his intention. His intention was, according to his professor, who I was fascinated having this conversation with, he said he really cared about the survival of the adaptable because only those who adapt survive. So it's
Yeah.
interesting how this is part of your core because it was also part of
Well, we
Darwin's.
think about fittest because I love what you just said. We think about fittest as being physically fit, mentally fit. Like we think about fittest as being sort of a powerful state of mind. But in fact, to me, the person who is fittest is the one who is most flexible, who is, whatever comes their way, it just sort of like, it just sort of brushes off, and you block that. Some of the blows you're going to take, but you're going to like absorb them, and you're going to then respond. And what happens to us isn't as important as what we do about it. And I think that people who really want control of every situation and feel like the outcome is totally in their hands, I think they generally are fairly miserable people because that just doesn't happen. That's not real life. Real life is about things coming out of nowhere or things not going your way. And, if you can take those things, treat them as teachable moments, and you learn. Like I know when I'm in a long race and I hit 60 miles and I can't go any further, my brain is telling me like this is it. Like I can't, I'm done. I can't go any farther. But I know that if I dig into my experience and my knowledge, I know that actually what my body is telling me is I need calories, I need to drink something. I probably need to like slow down just a little bit and walk for, 10 minutes or whatever. Like those are the practical things, the actions that I can actually take. And if I do those things, my pain may only go from a 10 to an 8, but when you're at a 10, an 8 seems like the best situation ever. And I think we can apply that sort of same sort of thinking to business, to our relationships. Like there are times when it just feels impossible, but we have accumulated the tools if we just use them. The biggest mistake that people make is they take self-help courses, they do all these things to try to improve themselves, but then they don't ever get any real world experience. And that's, again, why you don't have to run. Like, a lot of the people listening to this, maybe they're not runners, but to me, physical outlets are the way to go because they're controllable, generally speaking. And you can quit. Like, you could go out for a 20-mile run right now. Either of us could. And you know what? If it gets too bad, or the pain's too much, or we get injured, or what we fall apart, we can quit. It's not life and death, I mean, so you can. Whereas a lot of the situations, like a marriage or your business or whatever, like, you can't quit. I mean, you have to find a resolution to the thing. So if you've never felt what it's like to be empty and to be hopeless, which is how you feel sometimes if you're running like a marathon. Like, if you've never felt that before, then you can't know how to respond. And so, again, the Darwin example is great because I think the fittest is the person that most often puts themselves in a difficult situation, purpose, learns from that experience, and uses that knowledge to help themselves in every other part of their life.
So does that go along, or is that like the source? You have a phrase that you use often, and I think it's in the documentary, where you say you have to redefine your relationship with pain.
Yeah,
Is that part of that origin of your
it
philosophy
is. No,
there?
thank you. It's such a great thing. And it is a sentence that I actually said out loud to Matt Damon. He and I had just run 10 miles together in New York City, and we had just met, and he was considering, executive producing and narrating the film Running the Sahara. And he actually said to me, I can't, 10 miles, that's because we ran 10 miles together at a pretty good pace. And he's like, man, that is my limit. I can't possibly go any farther. And I did say to him, I said, Matt, you just have to redefine your relationship with pain. And it just came out of nowhere. This wasn't a practiced thing. It was just what I felt in that moment. And I believe that to be really true. We set limitations for ourselves because we're afraid. We're afraid we can't do it. We hedge our bets by saying, "Oh, well, here's what I want to do, but if I can get to this place, then that'll be okay. Like, I'll be okay with that." So instead of taking the risk to say, "No, I'm getting to the finish line no matter what." And instead of taking that, then we give ourselves outs along the way. And I'll give you another great example. And this is true. You ever watch an Ironman triathlon? You ever watch the finish? Right? So you see the finish.
Yep.
How many people like fall across the finish line? They literally fall across the finish line. Like, they are done. They are empty 100%. Guess what? If you moved that finish line a half a mile down the street, they would get to the finish line and then they would collapse. If you moved it 5 miles farther down the road, they would get to that finish line and then collapse. So that tells you it's a mental approach to this. We give our all to get to a certain destination, but that destination doesn't have to be predetermined. And again, if we can find ways to appreciate and really absorb the journey in a way that is both kind to ourselves and not hard. Like, "Oh, well, I didn't reach my goal, so I suck." Like, that's a common thing that I hear from people that I coach, even, and I really make them take a step back and understand that there's no, we're not Usain Bolt or Kipchoge trying to break 2 hours in the marathon. Like, we're just trying to make our lives better. And to give yourself a hard time about taking a chance and then maybe not hitting the goal that you set for yourself, to actually beat yourself up over that is so counterproductive to anything. Because you and I also talked, like, it doesn't matter. Nobody cares. We think the world is watching us and what we do. So we're embarrassed if we don't achieve something, whether it's in business or athletics or whatever it is. And I don't mean they don't care about us. It's just that we are inherently, we care about ourselves more than we care about anybody else. Like, nobody, Nobody is going to write us and say, oh, you suck, because you ran a 4-hour marathon or a 5-hour marathon. Like it's not, that's not real. That's in our heads. So we need to take risks, put ourselves out there, do hard things, don't over plan. People get caught up in getting stuck in the planning phase, and they never launch because, the situation just isn't right. It's like having kids. I think we talked about this. You know how when you're young and you think you're going to have kids and you're like, okay, but first I'm going to get this much money in the bank and I'm going to pay off my car and this and that. All this stuff's going to happen before I have kids because I want to be really prepared. None of that shit ever works, right? I mean, it doesn't work. You just you figure it out. Like, it's the ultimate hack in just having to figure out from a day-to-day basis how to actually do this.
This is great. I'm going to share something with you along the lines of what you just said, and then kind of get your thoughts around that. You said, no one cares what you do, and when I got back from the weekend there at Maryland, and of course, for me, it was a beautiful time being in that environment. It was the first time I'd ever been at an addiction center. The Ashley, Addiction Recovery Center. It was a beautiful property, beautiful all around. And you introduced me to all your friends, right? I knew you, I knew Greg, and I knew Hillary. Outside of that, I didn't know anybody else. And when I got back, you dropped me off at the airport. I flew back, and some of my friends met me here. We had dinner, and they asked me, "So how was it?" And one of the things that I said is like, no one asked me the entire weekend, "What do you do?" Which is a typical where I am. I am in a corporate environment. Here in Lake Nona Medical City, everybody is trying to build something and do something, and that's all good. We need that, right? But it was foreign to me to be with however many people were there, 200, however many people ended up showing up, and then sharing meals, running and walking with people for 2 days, and having all kinds of conversations. I ended up playing music for all of them at one point, and no one asked me, what do I do? No one was really interested, I'm sorry, in what I did for a living. They were just happy for me to be there, sharing with them, and we were just living the moment and talking about stuff and cheering you on and supporting you and the cause. Why do you think that is? What makes that atmosphere? I don't want to say that they don't care, because obviously people care, but that's not at the forefront of the first 5 minutes of meeting someone. It's like, hey, by the way, my name is so and so. Okay, great. Share pleasantries. Now, what do you do?
I know exactly the answer to that. I appreciate the question. That's so funny. It makes me smile so big. And it's because you're right. We go through, most of us in our business life, especially, hell, even in our personal life. If you aren't in a relationship, but you're looking for one, and you go to a bar or a party or wherever else you might meet somebody, and you start a conversation. Pretty much in the first 5 minutes, that other person is going to ask what you do, or you're going to ask them, because you're auditioning, right? You're auditioning. That's what it is. Like, you want to find out, especially with business, like, does this person have something that is valuable to me, or is there some way that we could, connect? And the beautiful thing about, the Penguin, and I think about the addiction community in general, and recovery community, I should really say, is that everybody like, you come into it, understand that everybody's seen a certain amount of shit. And I know, I know you, and while addiction isn't, an issue for you personally, you've had it in your life with other people. You understand the core of kind of where this comes from. And so we are all together in fellowship to just, like, outwardly love each other, share this experience, have some fun, not have those pressures of, what am I getting out of this? And I mean, what tangible thing am I getting out of it? Mostly what you get out of this kind of experience is sort of esoteric. It's, hard to put your finger on exactly, what did I come away, from this experience with. And I think that's the true beauty of it is there's not expectations. You don't have to feel like you're on stage. You were literally on stage for a while because you were kind enough to pick up the guitar and sing. I particularly loved, day 2 when the patients who were at Ashley currently actually were allowed to come out to the event and sit under the tent and listen to a couple of speakers and to you for 15 or 20 minutes, sing songs. And like, it was just, man, it just was great. It brought tears to my eyes. And that's the power of, I think, doing things where there's not an expectation of getting something out of it. I also want to say one final thing. No, I'm not correcting you when I say this, but I think you'll agree with this. It was my sober birthday, 31 years. And so I ran for 31 hours. But as I tell everybody, you're there to honor something in yourself. You're not there really to honor my sobriety. You're there to honor either an important milestone in your own life, whether there's an attachment of a number, of that, or, with some people, it's maybe the loss of a loved one, which I know, you've experienced just recently. And, to do something that is just honoring yourself and being alive and appreciative. Physical movement makes you raw, especially if you do it for a while. You every hour I was out there, I scraped away another layer of my normal daily life, and it allowed me to dig into a part of myself that I can't normally access. And I think that's what it's about. And, I make jokes all the time about how, your middle school PE teacher ruined running for you because, that man or woman used running as a punishment. And all of a sudden in your mind, you for the rest of your life, you think running sucks and like this hurts and whatever. And as we get older, it gets harder to restart the engine of movement. And, but if you think of it as this layer, and you're taking off layers of your emotional self and sometimes even your physical self, depending on your physical condition, you're trimming all that down and you're trying to get to the good stuff. And it's very accessible through physical movement.
You said something that I thought was very powerful. There was a moment during the weekend, I wanted to share this with the audience because I think it's important, and it has to do with relatability. There was a moment after I played the music, I got the crowd going, and then we started introducing the speakers, right, that were speaking before you, and then you spoke, and then the event continued. And there was a moment in time when I was in the back listening to Kelly and listened to a few of the others and Hillary, of course, and a few of the others that spoke. And for a moment, and you and I talked about this when we were on the car on the way back, I felt like I was out of place because almost everyone there was a recovering alcoholic or an addict, and they had a story. Everyone there had their dark night of the soul type of story where they had gone down into a hole, and then either on their own or with the help of loved ones, they dug themselves out, right? And I felt for a moment like I don't have a story like that, right? And you said something to me. I wanted you to, if you remember, if you could share what you answered to me when I was sharing this with you.
It's so funny. I don't remember exactly what I said, but what I really did say, I'm sure, was some version of, of course you have a powerful story. You have a story of resilience, of pain, of while it may not be addiction, like as we define it with drugs and alcohol, your story is inspiring to other people. And the thing that we forget very often is we judge our own stories, all of us really, as being sort of boring. And that to another human being, that if you are willing to be vulnerable, because look, man, I've known you for a while, and I know some of the hardships and whatever, but when I first met you, um I was like, man, this guy really has everything together. Like, he knows, he's smart, he's funny, he plays music, he's got this and that and whatever. And I didn't like, I thought that was really great, but I also knew that the more I got to know you, the more I would learn of your struggles, because it just, no, there isn't a human being alive who's willing to like open up a little bit, who doesn't have those amazing struggles. So tell me, do a better job of telling me what I told you.
No, actually, that is around the same, almost verbatim what you said to me, and it has to do with that relatability. Is that we all have some level of trauma, we all have some level of pain. We all at times choose to suffer as a result of that pain, and if we zoom out and we address pain as pain, then we all relate.
Yeah.
If we try to categorize
Yeah.
pain, now we're segmenting ourselves, right? And then we're segmenting the population. Oh, this pain is different than that pain. And oh, your pain is not the same as my pain. At the end of the day, no one has a monopoly on pain, right? It's just
It's all
pain.
the same,
And
too. It's all the same. I always say success actually has a lot of different looks, right? Success can look like a lot of things. Pain looks very similar to, because it almost always is about relationships. It could be loneliness, it could be fear, depression, can be addiction, all these things. And I do not know a single person who's being honest that doesn't suffer from time to time from some of these things. How could a human being go through life and never have doubts? Maybe there's the occasional I don't even want to call them exceptional, because to me that's either a person who's had everything handed to them, or they haven't risked enough. Because if you risk things as a human being, you are going to fail. And that's kind of the purpose. Like, I'm never afraid to say I'm going to go do this next adventure, or I'm going to go try this thing. And you know what? Most things actually don't work out. I mean, that's a fact. My wife kids me, because I've come home with more like earth-changing ideas in the 10 years we've been together. And like, out of 100, like 5 of them have actually, I've gotten far enough on the idea to actually make something out of it. But that's not, I think that's just if you want to change the world, man, you got to keep going at it. You got to keep digging in, and you've also got to be willing to fight through the doubt, the pain, the fear. Because having an idea, you and I both know this because we've done it together. Having an idea is the exciting part. You got the idea, you're doing the building blocks, like that first 10%, you are kicking ass, and the world seems like possibilities, nothing but. But then you hit that first roadblock or that first hurdle, or you find out somebody else already had the idea, or somebody steals your idea, or whatever this thing might be. That stuff happens every single day, and we have to find ways to be okay with that, and find a way to move forward in our lives. And I mean, I think that's the beauty of vulnerability. And I mean, vulnerability is the word that I use more than any other word, all the time, because I look at it as, people see me as having accomplished some really hard things, and I have. But the way I've done it really is through vulnerability. And I feel like sharing all the dirty details and the things that didn't go the way I planned allows other people to then share those details about their own life. And that's the kind of conversations you and I have regularly. I mean, we almost don't even have the ability with each other to have a shallow, meaningless conversation, because we always dig into it.
that's awesome. No, I do appreciate that about our conversations. And I wanted to lead to a close here with something that you told me, and you mentioned to a lot of people often, which is to keep it, you have to give it away. What do you mean by that?
We all have gifts. We all have gifts. you've got a lot of gifts, but like you've got music, you've got, and I know you give it away. You give it away in a variety of ways. You either share it by openly, anytime somebody asks you to pick up a guitar and sing, you say yes. But I also know that if someone came to you, a perfect stranger even, and said, "Hey, do you have a little bit of time to teach me how to play a few chords on the guitar or whatever?" Like, you would do it. And so the point that I like to make and my very first sponsor 30 years ago, his name was John, and he was in AA, and he was already in his mid 70s when he became my sponsor. So he's been dead a very long time, but he said those words to me: to keep it, you have to give it away. Whatever your gift is, art, music, writing, compassion, money, like the list is limitless. But whatever that gift is, if you're not sharing it with someone else freely, without an expectation of a return, monetary or otherwise, then why do you have it? Like, what is it? Because we all know that. I mean, anybody that's my friend anyway, if this isn't how someone's built, I'm probably not friends with them. Like, if you've gone to the trouble of getting good at this particular thing, or you have that knowledge, and someone who could really use your help asks you to help them, and you're not willing to do that unless you get something out of it, I think that's crazy. Because the best feeling that I get ever is when I get an email, or I get somebody after this podcast will reach out to me. I know it. I already know it will happen. Someone will reach out to me through my website or whatever and say, "Hey, can we talk about addiction, or can we talk about running, or we can whatever I might have struck a nerve with." I always say yes, because that's where I get to like make an impact on that person's life. And it's not much effort on my part. It takes a few minutes of my time, and you have to give it away if you plan on keeping the passion for that thing forever.
That is wonderful. That's a great way to wrap up this. We're a little bit out of time. We'll have to have you back at some point. Can you share with the audience where they can find you
Yeah, the
online?
best way is just my website, and it's just charlieengle.com. And everything is on there, social media handles, if you're into that stuff. I'm not a great social media person unless I'm out doing something like the penguin. I think I posted, 50 times. But if I'm just at home doing nothing, you're not going to see a lot about that. But you can also buy my book if you choose to. If you want a signed copy of the book, you can see some of my talks that I've given around the world to Fortune 500 companies, or to the United Nations or the World Water Conference or wherever it may be, and articles. So it's kind of a clearinghouse, and I'll leave people with a tease. As in my sobriety, well into sobriety, 19 years sober, I found myself in federal prison for a year and a half. And, there's a lot to that story, and I talk about it, write about it. It's always part of what I normally include. So there's a lot of information there, which I think most people will find interesting. So just the website.
It is interesting indeed. I highly recommend it, and the book was awesome for me. Especially, actually, that I have the book, but I actually listened to it because you narrate it yourself, and I thought that's always a nice touch when the author actually narrates the book, and it was very firsthand, very highly recommended. Charlie, thank you for your time, and I guess I will be seeing you in Costa Rica at some point in the next
You
couple of
darn
months.
right you will. Keep training, brother. So I got you.
Thank
All
you.
right. Take care. Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me.